It is a form of resistance to actually laugh, especially when you laugh in face of oppression and authority.
I first saw The Time That Remains when I was in film school back in 2009, and I remember being genuinely confused by what it was trying to do. On the one hand, it's a personal and tragic story about a Palestinian family living under Israeli rule. But instead of a realistic historical drama, we get a Wes Anderson-style comedy. The story itself is autobiographical and historically true, but the style makes it feel fictional, almost fantastical. And there's a reason why director Elia Suleiman chose this style.
In ghettos, when we reach that despair, we turn this despair into humor for the sake of resisting finality.
Oppression results in despair and a loss of hope, and one way out of this despair is to transform these circumstances into humor. Tragedy becomes comedy. And this act, ironically, resists the very oppression that's causing the despair. It reclaims a sense of power and dignity. Instead of pitying these characters, we relate with them. For better or worse, a narrative structure that categorizes one side as a helpless victim and the other as an evil oppressor results in pity for the victims and hatred for the oppressors. There's an othering of both groups involved, a feeling that that could never be me. I could never do something so horrible, or conversely, I could never be in such a powerless position. Suleiman instead creates a beautiful aesthetic and a relatable humor in the midst of tragedy. And this makes you accept that these people are a lot like me. That could be my family. And Suleiman has a name for this act of transforming a tragic situation. He calls it extending time vertically.
The humor of a ghetto, for instance, stems partially from the necessity to extend time and to gain time, often vertically. So if you know that you have a certain amount of time that you can sustain yourself in despair, whether it's a constant or whether it's before being taken to the gallows, one way to expand your life at this moment would be actually to poeticize. And there's a lot of poetry in the humor as well.
I'll come back to this concept of extending time vertically, but first, let's get into the story and how this film is structured. The Time That Remains has 4 acts that take place during 4 time periods: 1948, 1970, 1980, and present day, which was 2009. Before the first act, we start with a prologue in the present day. A driver has just picked up a mysterious, silent passenger from the airport, and in the process of driving him to his destination, a storm breaks out and he becomes lost. He calls for help on the radio, but gets only silence in return. The state of being lost then seems to transition from a geographical uncertainty to an existential crisis. And he repeats over and over, "Where am I?"
Funny.
We later find out that the silent passenger in the back is the film's director, Elia Suleiman. He plays himself when the film is in the present day, and he never says a word. Or as the subtitle of the film says, he plays a present absentee. We're then taken back to 1948, the year Israel became a state. Here we meet the director's father, Fouad Suleiman, a resistance fighter on the day Nazareth unconditionally surrendered to the Israeli army. It's a day of defeat, or as the Israeli flyers ironically put it, a day of liberation. And ironic is the best word to describe the way that these events are framed. Israel really did take over on this day, and Elia's father really was a resistance fighter who was nearly killed. But everything about the way these events are presented give the impression that we're watching something constructed, something fictional. Nearly every shot has a planimetric composition. That is, the background is a flat plane, with actors either facing the camera or in profile, just like in a play. It's impossible to talk about this aesthetic without mentioning Wes Anderson. As another YouTuber, Thomas Flight, I think successfully argues, the purpose of this aesthetic, or at least its effect, is that the viewer feels the presence of the storyteller in the images. Each shot feels meticulously crafted. While most directors are meticulous about framing, that meticulousness is meant to feel invisible. They want the viewers to forget they're watching a movie, not be reminded of it. But as we watch Fouad navigate the streets of Nazareth, get captured, betrayed, threatened, and nearly killed, it's impossible to forget that we're being told a story. But it is an enjoyable story, with a brave and handsome and completely romanticized hero. And of course, this hero is Suleiman's own father. Tragedy is reframed into comedy. Oppressors are made to look pathetic, and the oppressed reclaim power and dignity. Because, as we all know, the power that resides within an individual, the virtues they possess, are infinitely more impressive to us than the abstract power of a state.
ספור עד 10, כשאתה מגיע ל10 אני מפוצץ את הראש שלך. ספור. 1, 2, 10.
To cap off this day of defeat, the first act ends with Fouad being beaten and his limp body tossed over a ledge. In 1948, roughly 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes and never allowed to return. Many of these families moved to the West Bank or Gaza, where their descendants still live to this day, if they're still alive. Those who did try to return were known as present absentees. Because they were absent on a certain day, they were no longer allowed to live in their home, even if they were forced to leave and returned with proof of ownership. In 1950, only 156,000 Palestinians remained in Israel, and 46,000 of those were considered present absentees. But because Nazareth was majority Christian, and Israel didn't want to damage relations with Western nations, it was one of the few towns where inhabitants were not expelled. And today, Nazareth is known as the Arab capital of Israel. The second act takes place in 1970 when Elia is 10 years old. We're presented with what I guess I would call dark situational comedy, like if a sitcom took place in a ghetto. Their neighbor continuously douses himself in gasoline, only for Fouad to nonchalantly save him. Children are awarded a prize for singing nationalist songs in Hebrew. Elia is scolded for calling the US colonialist. Fouad is harassed while fishing at night with his friend. And all of this feels like the new normal. Variations of the same scenes repeat, and all of it is presented in the same ironic, meticulously crafted tone. The monotony only broken up when Fouad disobeys an order and puts his life on the line to save an Israeli soldier. The second act ends when Fouad is arrested in the middle of the night after being suspected of smuggling weapons by sea, presumably because of his nighttime fishing. Ironically, the same man who almost died saving an Israeli soldier is then accused of conspiring to revolt. We're then dropped into 1980, and Elia is now a young man. We get the same dark sitcom vibes as the last act, but there's more political unrest now. A few years earlier, in 1976, the Israeli government announced that they would be confiscating Palestinian-owned land in a project called the Judaization of the Galilee. In response, Palestinians across the state organized demonstrations. Military and police killed 6 unarmed demonstrators, injured 100, and arrested hundreds more. March 30th, known as Land Day, is still commemorated by Palestinians to this day. We find out that Land Day is approaching, and that during the last Land Day, Elia was accused of tearing an Israeli flag and forced to leave the country. And so his mom worries about what might happen to him this year. And sure enough, a policeman shows up to warn him that he's been denounced and needs to leave the country, despite the fact that the protests are happening outside and he's clearly not participating in them. We then get this slapstick scene of an injured protester being protected by hospital staff while soldiers try to arrest him. It goes back and forth until finally a soldier aims a rifle, forcing the hospital staff to back down. Elia then picks up his father from the same hospital and drives to the pharmacy to get his prescription filled. Fouad, who has dealt with health issues ever since his beating in 1948, just recently had open heart surgery. He falls asleep in the car, and with Elia fleeing the country, it becomes clear that this is the last time he'll see his father alive. It's obvious that this film, The Time That Remains, is concerned with time, and limits to time, and the quality of the time that we do have. This finality, this limit to the time that Elia has with his father, a limit that's imposed on him by the state, is the very thing that the film wants to resist. But when we're powerless to change those limits, when we're forced to accept that our time remaining is outside of our control, we stop trying to extend time horizontally. We stop trying to gain more time, and instead we extend time vertically. We slow it down and make the most of it. We make meaning out of the time that remains. The final chapter of the film takes place in the present, and Elia is now played by himself, the director. As in all his films, his character, called ES in the credits, simply doesn't speak. He's a silent observer, a present absentee. He arrives from out of town, now middle-aged. His father has presumably passed away, as we had predicted, and in his place are two very lovely housekeepers who care for his diabetic mother. Instead of another land day, we get Israel's Independence Day, and instead of protests, we get fireworks. After seeing friends and spending some time at home, Elia takes a rather awkward cab ride to Ramallah in the West Bank. He can't help but to try to glance at the woman sitting next to him, but every glance is interrupted by the sudden appearance of a nude Marilyn Monroe hidden under the sun visor. The energy in this city feels different than Nazareth. Elia is woken up to violent protests outside his hotel window, only briefly interrupted by a woman pushing a stroller. And this act of defiance sets the tone for the end of the film. You get the feeling that she's not purposefully disrupting the conflict. She's just not letting the conflict disrupt her. We then get the most iconic scene of the film, and the one I opened this video with. It's another example of someone resisting this occupation by doing what they want, regardless of the gun pointed at their head. And it feels like a callback to Fouad's defiance in 1948. Instead of begging, instead of trying to extend his time horizontally, he extends it vertically. He passes over 6 through 9 and skips straight to 10. Because it's funny, because it's poetic, because no matter how small his window of time, he's going to do what he wants, not what he's told. And because this innate power that he possesses is so much more admirable than the abstract power of a state, the injustice of this oppression becomes crystal clear. It's the power of a state that allows weak and sadistic people to commit acts of evil. This is true of any and every state, no matter how well-intentioned. And perhaps it's for this reason that Elia has said,
"The fact is, I don't believe in states. I have absolutely also no identifications with statehood. I feel like what's really essential politically, morally and ethically is justice. And I always said that I will fight for Palestine for the Palestinian flag to be raised, but when it will be raised, I'm going to fight for it to be lowered down. Simply because my issue is not about borders. My issue is about people having simply equality, that they are living in a secular society, that they choose whatever they want to do in a democratic state of being."
And in these small acts of defiance, even those who serve the state can be seen as humans. Humans who themselves are being used as tools by this abstract power. Because every single person, no matter who you are, faces limits. Whether it's the oppression of a state, or whether it's time itself. And Suleiman sees the oppression of Palestinians as a more extreme microcosm of a global state of things.
My feeling is we live in a global ghetto. And in a ghetto, usually we are reaching a certain despair. And in ghettos, when we reach that despair, we turn this despair into humor for the sake of resisting finality. We try to somehow expand the limits of time in order to survive the catastrophe, the apocalyptic moment that we are living. I think personally we are living this at this moment.
The film ends with Elia sitting just outside the hospital where his mother is being treated and where she's presumably going to die soon. He watches people as they enter and exit the hospital, and we're given little glimpses into their lives. Some of these glimpses are hilarious, some are sad, and some are fascinating. But I don't think there's any specific meaning we're supposed to take from it. I think it's just a microcosm of what the film is. One man's limited observations through his little window of time. Not at home, not belonging, just observing and making the most out of this in-between liminal state.